Okay, well, everybody is entering the room. I'm just going to thank you both, Andre and Jay, for being here. For those of you who are joining our Wit, Words, Ideas, and Thinkers series for the first time, welcome. We want these talks to be very informal and fun and immersive. So as people enter this space, please do write your name in the chat box, who you are, where you're joining us from, so that it feels a little bit more community building and friendly here. We do leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Nikki will call on you if you raise your hand or your cartoon hand. But really, during the talk, please do share your comments and thoughts in the chat as a running commentary. We do love to hear from all of us. So let's get going. My name is Lynn Volger. I am the Executive Director of the Authors Guild Foundation. The Authors Guild was founded in the early 1900s to champion writers of all genres. We are the nation's oldest and largest professional organization of writers and serve as the collective voice of American authors. We have long supported the rich and diverse literary culture of our country. The foundation is the charitable arm of the Guild, founded by literary luminaries such as Toni Morrison, Saul Bellow, John Hersey, Madeleine L'Engle, James Michener, to name a few. Wit is our Words, Ideas, and Thinkers series, where we explore interesting, important issues and ideas of the day. And today we have two interesting guests to talk about a very important issue, wine. They are André Hueston Mack. Welcome, André. He is a winemaker, designer, sommelier, blogger, restaurateur, and some other things we will get into this evening. He left a perfectly good job, day job at Citicorp Investment Services to pursue his passion for wine. The gamble seemed to have paid off. He was awarded the prestigious title of Best Young Sommelier in America, which led him to Yountville, California, where he worked at Thomas Keller's French Laundry, and then here in the city at Per Se. He went on in 2007 to start his own label, Maison Noir Wines, now Maison Noir. He is the author of the book 99 Wines, A Black Sheep's Guide to Life-Changing Wines, which came out in 2019. He has also edited and collaborated an activity and coloring book for children, adorably called Small Time. That's TYHYME Cooks. And if this were not enough, he has gone out and opened 2 restaurants in Brooklyn under the brand & Sons, a micro bakery, a wine shop, and a taco stand, Morning Bird Tacos. Jay McInerney, friend of the Guild, thank you. Jay published his first short story in 1982 in the Paris Review, and since then has written 12 books, including the novels Bright Light, Big City, Ransom, Story of My Life, Brightness Falls, and The Last of the Savages. He had written 4 novels before 1996 when he wrote his first wine column for Condé Nast House and Garden. He then went on to do a wine column for the Wall Street Journal and Town and Country magazines. These essays have been collected in his books, The Juice, Bacchus and Me, and A Hedonist in the Wine Cellar. In 2009, he published a book of short stories entitled How It Ended, which was named one of the 10 best books of the year by the New York Times. He is also the author of many, many articles, book reviews, and essays, most of which are so funny that when I read them, my husband leans over and says, What? Tell me, because I am laughing so hard. And some so moving, they will make you weep, such as a profile on 9/11 victim, Dr. Sneha and Philip. These pieces have appeared in the New York Magazine, the Independent, the Guardian, the New Yorker, the New York Times. it is especially in these essays that you remember he studied with Raymond Carver at Syracuse. And so with that, I will welcome you, gentlemen. I think this is the first time you two have met. Is that right?
Well,
yeah,
we met per se a number of
Correct.
years ago, but I'm not sure that Andre. I was just another guy sitting at a table.
No, you weren't. No, you weren't. We all knew who you were. We all knew who you were. I just finished reading Bacchus and Me, and it was like, this is the guy. This is him. So we've met. This is the first time that we've actually collaborated on something like this. Yes.
Awesome. So
thank you.
Let's start with let's first talk about cat pee and petroleum, by which I mean the words that you use to describe the aroma of wines: acid, tannin, melon, grassy, herbaceous, with hints of this and that. What is that about?
Well,
Jay, you want to talk about?
Well, I find that some of that traditional wine vocabulary is off-putting for many people, and there are several ways to approach describing wine, and one of them is the literal the literal approach, where you try to detect literal equivalence to the flavors in the glass, whether it's chocolate or earth, or various herbs, floral scents. When I first started writing about wine, first of all, I know nothing about flowers, so I was out of luck describing the bouquet of a wine that way. And I think in my case, I kind of prefer metaphors, similes. When I compare a Chablis to Kate Moss, or an over-oaked California Chardonnay to Pamela Anderson, I think sometimes it gets to the point more viscerally than trying to describe the flavors, the butter, the oak, or in the case of the Chablis, I know you would say lean, flinty.
Yep.
I mean, there's the traditional wine vocabulary can be useful, but I think it's probably more useful when wine professionals are talking to each other than when they're trying to get other people excited about drinking wine. What do you think, Andre?
I think you're absolutely right. I totally agree with you. But for me, I'm more of the Jay McInerney camp. I'd love to describe wine and emotion and using popular culture to kind of really get to the point. However, if I would have talked about wine in the way that Jay talked about wine in the previous examples, I would have been fired from my job. That wasn't a way for us to do it. And you're right. I think more in the professional setting, these are the words. And I think for me, being all very new to it, I think, I got into wine. I was probably into wine for maybe 2 years before I actually got a job at the French Laundry. So that's really quick. And I'd never really worked in fine dining. So it was really quick on how I got there. And for me, it was a constant thing of like trying to prove myself, right? That like to everybody else, like, okay, so learning all the classic terms is something, to be a part of the club, right? Like, so I'm in here, I could do it. But I really like to describe wine in a different way. And, my vocabulary was slightly different when I explained wine to our staff, right? Was in a very fun and playful way that kind of really set me apart from a lot of the other sommeliers in that sense. But those are like terms that I feel like in order to break the rules, you have to master the rules in some ways, right? So for me, I had to be able to like understand and navigate and understand what these terms are to literally like kind of interpret it or translate them into layman's terms. And I think that's what kind of really helped me today.
So,
yeah. I think I went backwards because I never had any formal wine training. And I first sort of tried to invent my own vocabulary, and then gradually I tried to learn the more traditional wine descriptors, and which I think I can deploy fairly competently now. But it's still, when I don't know, when you say to somebody, you know, that when you're trying to describe the components of Bordeaux and the grapes, and you know, if you if you say, you know, that Merlot is kind of McCartney to Cabernet's John Lennon, you know, I don't know. Sometimes I think it's a more direct route to you know, to the point, and unless of course people aren't familiar with the Beatles.
Correct.
I want to jump on what you just said, that Andre, you came to wine and you wrote 99 wines. It came out in 2019. So you have been on this road a long time. Jay, you started writing about wine, like, and now you're just saying that you have had this long-term sort of education. So can you both start to talk about how you started writing about it? And Andre, you want to start on this one?
Yeah. You know, I got into wine in a weird way, right? I got into wine by watching old episodes of Frasier, right? Like that show made me feel like I was missing out, right? Like, you know, wine wasn't part of something that I did. And watching old episodes, you know, I had left finance and spent a lot of times just, you know, on the sofa. And the show would come on, and it was about these two pompous brothers and the way they interact, their relationship to wine and alcohol was just something fascinating to me, and I wanted to be a part of. But, you know, for me, it was definitely an intimidating world. And also just, you know, I never saw anybody who looked like me in a wine shop, right? And so it was that element, but like I've always felt that, you know, the greatest foil to pretension is humor. And somehow watching that show, I armed myself with, you know, some comedic anecdotes to combat that world. And that show gave me the courage to walk into a wine shop. And from there, you know, I could say that I'm sitting here. I never thought I would write about wine. I never thought I would be here on this panel with Jay or like any of this, or that anybody would even care about anything I had to say. I just was into wine. I just thought that it would make my life better. And then I caught the bug, and then it just, this is all of it spiraling out of control, just me trying to like catch up with it. So I never thought that I would ever write. And so I wrote a book called 99 Bottles, A Black Sheep's Guide to Life-Changing Wines. And when I say life-changing wines, they're the wines that shape my wine life. So it's basically my wine life history told through 99 bottles of wine. And so these are significant bottles, and I always think of wine as a placeholder in time, right? It's a memory that we are always trying to capture. But when I think of 1985 Chateau Reyes, I think about the restaurant catching on fire in 2004 at Per Se, right? You know what I mean? And so the stories built around these 99 bottles where you can follow my wine career, my wine life. And you know, it took a lot of courage, at least for me, to say that. Would anybody ever think that was interesting? I wouldn't have thought that, you know, back in 2001, but I never thought I would write about wine, but I really kind of just write about wine through my personal journey.
Jay.
Yeah, I first got the sense that wine was something that I should be interested in through literature, my initial career. And when I first read Hemingway, when I first read Evil and Waugh, you know, everybody was drinking wine, and it seemed cool, you know. They were drinking wine in Europe, you know, and there I was in various suburbs where my parents were drinking cocktails, you know, gin and tonics and old fashions, and acting very uncool. And I just thought, you know, wow, wine's cool. I'm really I'm interested, but it was. You know, obviously, you know, when I first encountered these books at the age of 12 or 13, it took me a while to actually experience the culture of wine. When I went to Syracuse University to study with Raymond Carver, I got a job at a liquor store to supplement my fellowship, and I worked as a clerk in a kind of it's kind of a marginal wine and liquor store. There was we sold probably more wild Irish rose than first growth Bordeaux, but but it sort of got me going, and I used to take home a bottle from the store every night. That was the tradition with the clerks, starting with a bottle of Yugoslavian Cabernet. There actually still was a Yugoslavia back then, and kind of working my way up to the sort of $5 Spanish cava. And it's good to start from the, you really have to start from the bottom, and to develop a palate, I think. And it's like climbing the mountain from the bottom. I'm a little skeptical of these people who start their wine drinking careers with sort of $200 Cabernets. It's a little bit like getting helicoptered to base camp at Everest. So I just started as a lowly wine store clerk, and kind of gradually worked my way up to the better wines. When I was actually working at that liquor store, when I got a phone call saying that my first novel had been accepted for publication, and I actually bought one of the better bottles of wine in the store, maybe the best bottle. There was a little shelf of Bordeaux that had been gathering dust for the whole time I was there, and I grabbed a bottle of 1978 Smith Haute Lafite, and although in some ways it's far from the best wine I ever drank, in other ways it was the best bottle of wine I drank because the context, because that was the day that my first novel was accepted, and so subsequently, when that first novel became successful, I was able to afford more Bordeaux. Happily, the publication coincided with the release of the 1982 vintage of Bordeaux in the United States. So,
how did you started to write about it?
Well, about 10 in 95, 96, a friend of mine named Dominique Browning took over the editorship of House and Garden magazine, and she knew that I was quite passionate about wine, and she had decided that people who were interested in the good life might be, were interested in wine, and she thought that the House and Garden, the new House and Garden, should have a wine column, and she approached me, and I said that, much as I loved wine, I didn't know enough to write a wine column. And she said, "Well, why don't you approach it that way, as somebody who's just a chapter or two ahead of the students in the textbook, but with a sense of kind of wonder and humor." And she said, "You're a good storyteller. She said, write like a novelist about wine." And so I think that I decided, to apply, as I mentioned earlier, my interest in creating similes and metaphors, and also to write about the characters in the wine world. I mean, there's fascinating people in the world of wine, and they all most of them have great backstories, and everybody in California in the wine business, practically everybody had some other career before they started wine, and that's part of the interest for me of going, visiting them, listening to their stories, and writing about them as if they were their characters in my fiction.
André, why don't you take it from there and talk about your stories, about backstories of characters that you have met, both in your sommelier days, but also in your winemaking days.
Well, I mean, I can just only second what Jay said. It seems that wine draws different peoples from all walks of life, right? It seems like everybody has 9 lives. You sit down at the table and you talk to someone, and they used to be, some scientist that worked on, the H-bomb or something. You know what I mean? They just live these fascinating lives, and wine attracts them. And the wine is this thing of attraction that brings everybody in. I have way too many crazy stories of the people we met. I think there was a movie called Sour Grapes. My attorney told me not to be involved in that movie because I knew the counterfeiter. It was about a guy counterfeiting wine. And that was a big part of, me moving to New York, 2004. There was, from what was explained to me, it was the golden era of selling wine and buying wine. I met Jay during that time. The restaurant was always full of many different characters from all different walks of life, buying some of the most expensive bottles of wine. We could never keep our verticals intact because they were just flying off the shelf like that, 45 Bordeaux, like this every day. And, so you just met all kinds of different people from walks of life. And I found that, but that's what I find most interesting about the wine business as well. It's not just the wines are great and all that, it's the people and the stories and how they got there. I mean, it's just a really fascinating thing. It's really kind of hard to explain.
By the way, Andre, I want to say I'm also a huge fan of Frasier. I was visiting Angelo Gaia in Barbaresco a number of years ago, and suddenly his phone blew up, and his basically Frasier had mentioned Gaia's wines on the previous night's episode, and from all over the world were calling Gaia to congratulate him on this weird little cameo appearance on Frasier.
Well, that was actually the first time I ever heard of the wine as well. Right. Yeah. And so, and then subsequently being in the wine business, I mean, I learned that 61 Bordeaux was a great vintage from that show.
Frasier.
Right. And in my book, I talk about, the first week that I'm on the floor at the French Laundry, someone brings in a bottle of 1961 Haut-Brion. And it's an immediate flashback to the episode where the 61 Haut-Brion came in, and Frasier was asking Niles if, where's his share at? And it was from that I just knew. It was just like a full circle moment for me. It's like I'm working in the best restaurant in the world, which I think it was just named that year. And here it is. And it's like, I know about 61 Bordeaux, and obviously I studied and all that other kind of stuff. But the first time I ever knew that 61 was anything of importance was on this show. It was, it's just a really interesting thing. And the fact when I show up, Gaia, which is Angelo Gaia's daughter, was doing an internship at the French Laundry. So I got to meet her like my first day there.
Oh,
really crazy.
Yeah. Oh, well, I didn't know she did that.
Yeah. No, she worked at the French Laundry.
Cool.
You both seem to be having a great time with this wine thing. Both your way of writing about it also takes a lot of the sort of pretentious factor out for people like us. And but one of the things Jay wrote, just back from Burgundy. Yeah, I know, sounds great. If I had a bottle of La Tâche for every person who said how lucky I am to get paid to taste wine in places like Napa and Bordeaux and Burgundy, I'd be one very happy wino. But the reality of the wine writer's job, even a part-timer like myself, is not as glamorous as it sounds. Sometimes you wake up in the morning in your rented apartment of Brünn with a little bit of a mal de tête, and that handheld shower thing is really not working, and you stop at the cafe and grab a coffee, etc. So are we supposed to feel bad for you? Like, because you guys seem to really be having a great time. You want to talk about some of your stories?
Well, I think I was referring to, some of those trips I did. I was very lucky actually to benefit from my wine education was financed by Condé Nast back in the days when they were just really open-handed, and first class business class tickets to Europe, and fine hotels, and so I mean it was really fun in one sense, but in the other hand, it's like, I took it quite seriously, and when I went to a wine region, I would contact all the what I considered the best winemakers, and I would try to do 3, 4, 5 visits a day. And, then that involves, first of all, getting lost constantly on the roads of Piedmont or Provence or wherever, but, going down the cellars and sometimes like tasting 20 or 30 wines before lunch, it's, on the one hand, it's a lot of fun, but, as with any profession or avocation, even you know, to really learn and to do it well, you have to work hard, and you have to taste hundreds and thousands of wines. I'm sure Andre, as a sommelier, would back me up on this. A lot of them not so good, really, at all. You know, in order to really hone your palate, build up your sense memory, and you know, build up a kind of a knowledge bank. I mean, it is fun, but it's sort of like, you know, learning an instrument too. You have to play scales over and over and over again.
Andre, how is Jay's sort of self-taught education different than that of a sommelier?
You know, at least for me, it's a little bit more structured. I mean, I think the key is it is all work, and it is taste, palate, memory, right? So the idea, the more you taste with better people, and Jay had an ultimate education. You know, it was kind of more the education before there were accrediting, not industries, but bodies that were around. Yeah. So, you know what I mean? So like before WS, you know, there's been Master Sommelier, WSET, but like there's nothing that replaced the idea of going to a region and tasting with the person who made it. And that's what Jay did. And that's a phenomenal way to be able to do it. It's very expensive. Like you said, he did it through Condé Nast, but like that is ultimately the way. I know people that they go to Champagne every single year or twice a year and taste with the producers on the ground, you know, in the soil, talking about wine. For a lot of people and a lot of sommeliers, that's not, you know, we don't get a chance to do that. So ours is a little bit more technical. You know, by working in a restaurant, you get to taste a lot of wine. And that's the key, being able to taste a lot of wine. And that's where it really gets expensive. And for me, you know, I got the chance to taste millions of dollars worth of wine, you know, by working in a restaurant of the caliber like French Laundry and Per Se. And the more you taste, you know, the more you start to understand the wines. And for me, it was later, the travel kind of circled back around. But, you know, it's a lot more studying and that kind of thing. Jay's thing was actually being there, like being actually there accounts for a lot more.
Can you tell us how you started your wine label and when you felt
totally.
like you were ready, like to do that?
Yeah, so when I first showed up at the French Laundry, Thomas had, at the time, I think we believed that he was bequeathed 8 barrels of wine from a local winery. And this was kind of their first foray into him making his own wine. And so I spent a lot of the early part of the day, you know, from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. in other wineries, but in particular, this one winery as they started to make their own wine. And because I worked at a place like that, we were constantly being invited to different wineries around the valley to come out and do barrel selection. So they would allow us to come in and taste through the barrels and pick the ones we want and bottle exclusively for the French Laundry. And so that's kind of really how I got into like that part of wine and planted to see that I could actually do it myself. And then I just met all these people along the way that kind of made it happen. And in some weird way, it started out as blending, and then from blending, it went to buying barrels to leasing parcels of land and that kind of thing. And then realizing, shifting gears, that like, you know, that I wanted to speak to a younger audience about wine, and I felt like I really couldn't do that at, you know, $29 on the shelf. You know, you definitely can't do it at $89 on the shelf. And so that really kind of made me switch gears and really concentrate on wines by the guys in restaurants, which I knew is like a revenue center and could end up on the shelf at, you know, under 20. But that was kind of my journey, just, you know, meeting different people along the way and just asking questions. And obviously having that experience and working for Thomas and being in Napa Valley really kind of helped. You know, I left the restaurant in 2007. So I'd worked there for 3 years and had started this company, and it took, you know, off and on, you know, the money would run out and I have to go to work for someone else. And so, you know, for 3 years, it wasn't until 2010 that, you know, I left consulting and really focused on now what's called Maison Noir Wines. I was in a long legal battle with Mouton Rothschild, I would say for like 7 years, which is part of the game, which is really, it's really interesting how litigious the business was. I kind of wore it as a badge of honor in a way that like such a prestigious and big company would even hear of me, this little person, this little guy. And I got cease and desist from all the top, DRC, Domaine Romani Conti. I got letters from them. They're all hanging up in my office. But like the idea that this, me doing this thing that, caught the attention of some of the top wineries, I felt like I had won, even though, that legal bill that I got every month was scary. And that, that was it, and for me, I did what I knew how to do, was to talk to people. So I got on the road and traveled, almost every single week for a decade. And so, spending a week at a time in Oregon where we make our wines to, the next 3 weeks to anywhere in the world where anybody would listen to my story. and that's how I built the brand.
Jay, tell us what you would, so it's 5:31. We want to leave some time for Q&A and I already see some nice questions in the chat, but we're talking, holidays are upon us, and we're looking for recommendations, both for the splurge, for the big Christmas, New Year's splurge, as well as maybe some, modest things, because we're going to be going to many, many parties over the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Well, my first gift recommendation in terms of wine is always champagne, because, even though champagne can serve many purposes and it's possibly the most versatile food wine in the world, it goes with so many things that I hate to just, recommend it as a sort of wine for this time of year, but at the same time, it is champagne is the wine of celebration, and it is it is somehow so suitable for gift giving. It kind of, everybody smiles when they think of champagne, almost everybody, and by the way, when we say champagne, we mean a wine that is grown in a specific section of northern France. It's taken many years for the French to kind of establish that principle legally, but and that is not to say that there aren't other sparkling wines which are very good. California is producing some very fine sparkling wines that are at a lower price point, inevitably, than the average champagne. In fact, many of the California producers are French producers who went to Napa and Sonoma and the Anderson Valley and so on to take advantage, really, of the slightly more clement weather and what were at one time lower land prices. I guess they still are, perhaps. But I would say, if you can come up with $50, you can get a really good bottle of champagne. Whether you want to do, an established brand like Veuve Clicquot or Moet and Chandon, or, what's really fun is to explore these grower champagnes that have really entered the U.S. market in the last 5 or 7 years. Or there's, a lot of the grape growers in Champagne have in recent years started bottling their own wines and making, more distinctive, more artisanal champagnes than the kind that get produced by the millions of cases by the big companies. But there's also, if you don't have $50, you can get a great 20 or a very good $20-$25 bottle of champagne from California, from Mom, from any number of makers. You can get a Cremant de Bourgogne, a champagne-like wine produced in Burgundy. I mean, a lot of people like Prosecco, and I'm not gonna I'm not gonna bash it here, but it's not my favorite sparkling wine, except in a few cases. But that's my first that's my first recommendation for gifts is a bottle of bubbly. I don't know, Andre, you got any ideas there?
No, I second that. I think, nothing says celebration like bubbles. For me, it's like either go big or go home, go big or go home. So whatever your favorite sparkling wine is, buy it in a larger format, a Magnum, a double Magnum, triple Magnum. And for some of the, like, even if you love Prosecco, they make those, and nothing wrong with it. They make those in larger formats. I think nothing says party or nothing says I love you like, a Magnum. I think larger, if it's something that is, you got that? If there's something
I'm writing these things down, yes.
If there's something even age-worthy, that you want to buy, those tend to last longer. They tend to be a little bit rarer. So for me, it's always been, large format is always a good way. You show up to a party with a big bottle, everybody recognizes who you are. And then, I think a great gift is something that you're connected to. So if you went and visited a property or know something about it, I think that's always a great way telling the story. Going to the party, I would always say, bring something that you want to drink or that you're interested in. And if that's the case, make sure you open it. You can't come to the party with something and then leave with it because no one opened it, right? You gotta, once you give it there, it belongs to them. If you want to drink it, you should open it. But I always say, bring a large format, bring something that you're excited about, and share the story.
Well, I just want to compliment that story. There's a flip side to that story, which is that if somebody arrives at your house with a really good bottle of wine, you don't grab it and take it down to your cellar and squirrel it away. You open it for the guests. That's wine etiquette 101.
That's so nice, because I've heard opposite that, like, if you've gone to the trouble, like many, good cooks, of pairing every single thing, maybe you don't want to bring that out, and people say, this is for you. But I always assume that people do bring the wine and hope that we all share it together. So
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So what are you drinking? We've got the first course, oysters or some kind of light fish, and then we're going straight into like the prime rib. And I want to hear what's being served at your house for New Year's or Christmas dinner.
Well, oysters for me is easy. I think Chablis and oysters is one of the great classic wine pairing combinations. In fact, the vineyards in Chablis are littered with the fossilized oyster shells, and the limestone underneath the vineyards is literally created from trillions and trillions of compacted bivalves, the oysters and so on. And in fact, I mean, Chablis can be very, if you're willing to spend, $20 to $30, you can get a really great Chablis. At a slightly lower price point, you can get another French, lean, crisp French white called Muscadet, which I think is also a great accompaniment for oysters. Yeah. That would be my those would be my go-tos for the first course.
I'm going champagne. That's me.
Oh,
I go champagne. First course, champagne. Fish. I'm a big, huge Alsace fan, so a rich white from Alsace. And then what we drink if we're going in the prime rib is Old California. But it's something that I really love. I mean, I built a whole bar around old American wine dating all the way back to the 50s. But I would drink, old Cabernet from Napa.
Oh.
Yeah, that would work. That would work for me as well.
Yeah.
That worked for me as well. I mean, the sort of progenitor of Napa Cabernets were of course Bordeaux, and one of the things that people forget is that, aside from the sort of 100 most famous chateaux in Bordeaux, there are hundreds of small chateaus that make very fine, full-bodied reds for very reasonable price. Particularly with global warming, a lot of the more marginal parts of Bordeaux and the world, for that matter, that were having trouble ripening grapes 30, 40, 50 years ago, aren't having that trouble anymore. So
Right.
It used to be that only the prime spots in Bordeaux really got the grapes ripe, and even then they didn't always do it. And now you can, the Bordeaux Superior appellation is one that encompasses a lot of really good, inexpensive wines.
Where are new places, either in the US or other parts of the world, that are surprising to you, like the good wines coming out of them?
England, actually. I think some of the great sparkling wines, some really great sparkling wines are happening in England. Ridgewood Ridge S or something. I forgot the name, but anyways, some remarkable sparkling wines. Even when you think about, I think a lot about the Willamette Valley. I got there in 2007. It's wet, damp. Picking grapes in, late October, to now picking grapes in like early September.
Wow.
Ask anybody who grows anything, and global warming is, or whatever you want to call it, is a real thing that lots of people have to deal with. I mean, they say that wine in India might be a place. It's just crazy how the weather patterns are changing it.
So far, not yet, really. My experience.
No, not yet. I'm talking about in the future. Not even close yet, but yes.
But you mentioned Willamette, which I love the Willamette Valley, and I've got to go back there this summer. But just to the north of you is of course Washington State. Well, I think Washington State makes some tremendous wines, and I think they're underrated and they're underpriced. Washington makes great. Washington State, particularly in Walla Walla area in the sort of central and eastern part of the state, makes terrific Syrahs and Cabernets. And for some reason they haven't really. I mean, I think everybody knows about Oregon now, but I think Washington is a little bit under the radar.
Well, it took 50 years for the Willamette Valley. I think we're 55 years old now, but like it really took a very long time for people to kind of understand what was going on there and that it was really special. And Washington's not too far behind. I think they grow a lot of stuff there, just not grapes. But I think the wines are really remarkable and really represent a lot of value, right? Yeah. Especially from California, if you compare the two.
Yes, or Burgundy.
Yeah.
So we have a long chat
yes.
full of questions. So Nikki, take it over. Nikki's gonna tee us up with questions.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you both. That was fascinating, and I probably could listen to you for another hour. But there are some very good questions in the chat right now. I do want to encourage anybody, if you want to actually read your question aloud, you can raise your hand. I promise I will see you. Or you can type it in the chat and I can read it for you. Currently, we actually have one great question from Penny, who wants to know how much is palate about personal preference versus classical standards?
Versus what standards?
Classic standards.
Personal.
Yeah. Your personal preference versus, I guess, what they teach you if you go to school.
Well, I think, first of all, to really develop I think there's almost two questions there. I mean, I think ultimately you're always right about your own taste in wine. If you love Prosecco, then it's a great wine. You're the only authority on your own palate, and you shouldn't be intimidated by anyone. On the other hand, I think to really learn about wine and to understand the variety and the complexity of the wine world, you really need to pursue a kind of as much as possible, an objective program whereby you really learn the characteristics of the different grapes. You know, you learn to tell Cabernet apart from Merlot, and likewise from Syrah, to the point that you can often recognize them in a blind tasting without without prior knowledge. Would you agree with that, Andre?
I totally think, and I think also it just expands your horizon. So you will really get to know your palate as you start to taste through lots of different wines, right? So the idea, it is personal preference. So like for me, buying at a restaurant, there's wines that I actually like, and there's wines that I like that actually won't go with the food. So there's like two separate things. But I think you benefit by tasting through troves of different wines to really kind of explore your palate and understand how tannin hits your mouth and how those things affect you. If you want to go down that route, right? Like that, you know, you don't have to, you can drink what you like. And I think ultimately that's what wins.
Thank you both. It's great to hear from somebody who hasn't matured past the box wines of college. Wants to know both of your opinions on natural wines. How do you think they compare to more conventional wines from older vintages and specific varietals and locations? And if you have any favorites.
Wow.
Got it.
That's a minefield.
It is. You know, I think for me, I'm part of the good wine movement. If the wine is good, I want to drink it. And I think when we talk about natural wine, there's not a real definition for what that is. That, you know, I think it's a lot of different things. Like there's a lot of crap wine out there that's in the wine world. And there's a lot of crap wine out there in the natural wine world. You know, some things that are heavily flawed. I think for me, my personal thing is that the wine should taste like where it comes from, not how it's made. And I think in some instances, natural wine is easily identified on the nose and on the palate, but there's no terroir, right? Like, you know, so it's like, there's no place that it's like, okay, this smells like natural wine. That's the first thing I get, not that it's from the Loire or that it's from a certain place.
Right.
But, you know, but I'm part of the whole thing. Whatever brings anybody to wine, I'm grateful for. And I think that's great. If this is how people are connecting with wine, that's great. And ultimately it kind of changes a little bit of it, you know, and I'm not with the dogma, you know, there's a lot of stuff that comes with it. And, you know, a lot of wine that's still going through fermentation when you open it. But then again, there's a lot of people surrounding it. Tastes are changing in America. Kombucha, you know, if you look at kombucha, sour beers, a lot of those people are migrating over into the wine space because of natural wine. And so, you know, for me, like I said, I'm a part of I champion a lot of those wines that are considered natural now that weren't, you know, in 2004. And there's just a lot more of them. And, you know, so I like I said, if it's good, I want to drink it. If it's not, I don't want to drink it. And that goes for any wine, and, you know, and especially natural. Yeah,
I think that natural wine, the whole natural wine movement is kind of it's early days. And as Andre mentioned, there still isn't really a solid definition of natural wine. I mean, obviously, it's minimal intervention, it's minimal or no chemical additives. But I think that, you know, like many enterprises in their infancy, you know, there's a lot of excitement in the world of natural wines, and there's also a lot of trial and error. And some of it frankly results in technically flawed wines. There's just no other way to put it. You know, when a wine smells like dirty socks, or it tastes like lighter fluid, it's something has gone wrong. And I think that, you know, some of the proponents of natural wine tend to glorify what some of us feel are technical flaws that are unpleasant. You know, and so I agree with Andre that I like good wine, and ideally, you know, the less intervention in the making of that wine, the fewer ingredients it has, the better. But I think sometimes something like a very tiny dose of sulfur dioxide is necessary to prevent bacterial spoilage. And there's just, I mean, it doesn't sound pleasant, but it can make for wines that are much more delicious than bacterially tainted wines.
Great, thanks so much. We have a question directly for Andre about why you chose the Willamette Valley for your wines instead of California.
Yeah, I cut my teeth on Burgundy, so all the great wine lists that I had a hand in building, they bookend on red and white Burgundy, so Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And for me, I always felt like, to me, like who was on the cutting edge and making really great Pinot Noir was the Willamette Valley. And also it was a place on the per se wine list that I could champion, so expanding that to back vintages of 1 page, 2 pages was something that I was really into. And then it came down to, ultimately it came down to a friend of mine who bought one of the most famous vineyards in America, just happened to be in the Willamette Valley, right? So that's ultimately what it came down to. But it was, it's a lower cost of entry. There was less competition, and I really like the wines, and that's ultimately why I chose the Willamette Valley.
Great, thank you. Brian, I see you there. Would you like to unmute and ask your question directly?
Sure. Thank you. So how often are you buying wine for immediate-ish consumption, in a few days versus buying wine to age?
Oh,
Well, in my case, I've been collecting wine for a long time, and so I'm fortunate to have a cellar that I can, when I am at home, select wine from that. In some cases, it has been in my possession for 20 or 25 years. But that said, a lot of the white wines that I drink, I buy for almost immediate consumption. For instance, the 2019 Burgundy vintage has just been released, and I'm a lot of the sort of more modest white wines of Burgundy from that vintage. I'm buying and popping them right now. I've gone through like 3 or 4 cases of 2019 Burgundies. I also, I do drink wines from California, and I think that an awful lot of contemporary California wines are made in a style that rewards early drinking, or immediate drinking. So, not everybody has a cellar, so it's important to discover those wines that don't need 10 years of age.
I'm the opposite. I have no cellar. I tell myself I don't collect any wine. I bought a wine store so I could just go shop at the store. So we have a wine store down the street, and that's basically where I buy anything from. I had like a weird thing about collecting wine, and I thought that was the way to go. But then I realized I should be drinking wine because I was fairly young. And now I just pay for anything that's special, right? So if I was going to drink something old or celebrating something old, then I would go find it, right? I would go find it, pay the premium for someone else storing it, and then bring it in. But so I'm not in a traditional, like I don't buy a whole bunch of wine. I buy it for the store, and then I just shop at my own store. So that, I know that doesn't really help you, Brian, at all.
You can buy
Generally saying, yeah, you can buy wine for me. Yeah, generally before that we would buy. And before I owned the store, basically we would buy like a pallet of wine, right? And that was kind of a trade. So we'd buy a pallet of wine around November, and that was supposed to get us through the whole year. So through the parties that we'd have in November, the holiday seasons, all of that, right, until the next November, and then buying things along the way, which kind of isn't practical either. But that's just how I do it. Sorry.
If you buy it, you'll drink it. If it's sitting there, it's gonna get open.
Correct. Well, that's why, my wife just texted me. She's like, "Hey, can you bring me a bottle of wine?" Like literally, there's no bottles of wine in our house. Right? Well, there's some champagne that's not cold, but yeah. So we have to go to the store. That keeps it out of reach a little bit.
Where are you right now?
Nashville, Tennessee. Oh, sorry.
Oh, Nashville.
No, we're talking to you. What are you drinking? I saw you pouring some wine.
Little cava. There's there's fantastic wine shop here, Woodland Wine.
I love them. They carry my wine. I love that shop. Yep.
Yeah, it's like a mile down the street. They're the best.
I know that wine shop too. My kids live in Nashville, and Nashville's got a great wine community.
It's fantastic. We love
You're
it.
in
Yeah.
East Nashville, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Nash
Y'all know.
Vegas. I love it. I love it. I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah, great food scene in Nashville too now. You know, and
Mhm.
I actually married a Nashville girl many years ago, and when I first went to Nashville, there wasn't much to eat besides hot chicken, you know.
Yeah.
And thankfully, it's a whole different story now.
Oh yeah.
Thanks so much, and thanks, Brian. It was a great question.
Of course.
I have a question from AJ and how you see the sommelier profession evolving in the future based on how restaurants function and wine prices are changing.
Ooh, I guess I haven't really thought about that. I thought like the pandemic was going to change that, but you still see sommeliers coming in. I think for a lot of restaurants, they were luxuries, meaning that all they concentrated was on wine. In other regions, if you were a sommelier, you took on other management duties. But I think also for sommeliers, there was this sense of entrepreneurship that happened during the pandemic, meaning, you know, doing a lot of these virtual things online and trying to figure out services and different things for themselves to operate without a restaurant. So what I would say about this new crop and generation of sommeliers, a lot of them are really entrepreneurial. And so I think there's a lot of things that popped up, like almost every weekly, there's some type of sommelier kind of base, you know, app or tasting or wine club or something like that. So I think technology will kind of really expand the future and the horizon of sommeliers, and just that term sommelier really won't apply to just being in a restaurant. You know, it would be, you know, it's ever expanding outside the four walls of a restaurant.
Yeah, I think in the past decades, sommeliers really sort of came to the forefront as the new arbiters of taste in wine, and suddenly, you know, in every larger city in America, you had sommeliers, and you know, in a city like New York, you had like a real community of sommeliers, and to some extent, they sort of took over where the traditional wine publications had once sort of ruled the taste making process. But as Andre said, it's interesting to, you know, the pandemic is affecting the somm world in ways that we're still you know, trying to figure out, and certainly a lot of sommeliers have branched out from the traditional serving of wine in fine restaurants.
Great, thank you. Ben, would you like to unmute and ask a question inspired by the new Beatles documentary?
Hi, everyone. It's Ben here. Nice to meet you. Thank you for doing this.
Hey.
You can tell I got an English accent, so thanks for the English plug. Yeah, I'm watching this Beatles documentary. It's unbelievable. Well, one of the greatest music documentaries. You can see they're drinking a lot of white wine, like, from Germany.
I can't wait. I still have to see it.
I haven't seen it yet either.
And I was sitting there watching it thinking, you know, I wonder which of these Beatles I would choose to sit down and have a glass of wine with. I was just wondering for both. Anyone past or present you would love to sit down with and enjoy a glass of Latache or Cava?
Well, I actually, I was lucky enough actually to go to a dinner in the Hamptons a few years ago, and lo and behold, who was at the table but Paul McCartney. And I can tell you, he's very good company. And he brought a bottle of Santa Margherita Pinot Grigio to the dinner. So that's apparently he does like white wine. I don't know. I'd love to drink with Hemingway. You know, I really would. I equally love Scott Fitzgerald, but Fitzgerald was really a terrible drinker, and I don't think he would be very good company. Whereas, I would love to split a bottle of Chateau Margaux with Ernest Hemingway.
I think for me, more, you know, Warhol, an artist or something like that. You know, I get asked this question all the time, and it always, like, you know, trips me up. I'm not real sure. I actually had the 76 Deinhard Riesling Alsace last Wednesday. So it was a great wine. It wasn't the 66, but it was 76. I think for me, you know, an artist, someone who's like, you know, I think Warhol was into wine. I mean, at least like you see some of that, but like just to be a part of fly on the wall and to be able to drink and hang out, to me, it doesn't matter what we drink, long as it was wine. Not a great answer by
No,
any
that's
means,
great.
but you know.
Thank you both.
Thanks, Ben. All right, we want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we have one very quick last question for you both, since we are the Authors Guild. Who are some of your favorite writers on wine?
Oh,
Boy, that's tough because I mean, I hate to leave people out. I'm just going to mention one book that I think is possibly the best wine book I've ever read, which is it's by a wine merchant named Kermit Lynch, and it's a book called Adventures on the Wine Route. And Kermit Lynch, back in the early 70s, went out and discovered a lot of these now iconic French winemakers and even iconic French wine regions. And it's really it's a great travel book. It's a great polemic. And it's a great wine book, and full of interesting characters from the wine world.
I mean, more satire. The Hostmaster, more of an industry kind of rag. I like that writing. The guys from Noble Rot, which is kind of a fun industry rag about wine, is great. And I couldn't sit here without saying, Jay. I read, reading those stories, really made me want to be a part of that scene, and it glamorized it in a way also for me that was like, wow, like this is like a really beautiful thing, and I wish I could be a part of it. So I'd have to say you're still around. And I still think that your wine writing is something very special. So thank you.
You're definitely a part of it.
Yeah, no, true. But
Oh, that's right.
thank you.
Well, thank you both so much for spending this hour with us, the aperitif hour. And I would just like to thank everybody else for coming. Our next talk is in January 10th, with Ralph Eubanks in conversation with Roxana Robinson. They will be talking about the writing and writers of the South. And then Gia Tolentino and Ronan Farrow will be with us Monday, February 7th, to talk about the lives of women in Me Too movement. So good night, everyone. Thank you. So nice to meet you both, and Happy New Year.